Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when we are faced with waiting for answers, waiting for a breakthrough, or waiting for a door to open. In these moments, we often question the delay, the silence, and the uncertainty that surrounds us. But I want to remind you today that God's timing is always perfect, and His way is always better than ours. There are moments in life when we find ourselves in seasons of waiting. We may be waiting for a breakthrough, a new opportunity, or the answers to prayers that seem to go unanswered. At times, the waiting feels unbearable, and we begin to wonder why things are taking so long. In these moments, we often question the delay and the silence that surrounds us. But the truth we must remember is that God's timing is always perfect. His way is not our way, and His plans transcend our understanding. We live in a world that demands quick results. We live in an age of instant gratification, where everything is available at the touch of a button. We send messages, and within seconds we get responses. We order food, and it's delivered almost immediately. We can access information in a matter of seconds, and we expect life to unfold in a similar manner. But when it comes to God's plans for us, His timeline does not conform to our human expectations. God does not work according to our clocks, and He doesn't rush to meet our deadlines. He operates in divine wisdom, knowing exactly when things need to happen. His timing is not bound by the constraints of minutes, hours, or days. God is the creator of time, and He knows the beginning from the end. What we view as a delay is often God's way of preparing us for what lies ahead. There is a divine purpose in the waiting process, and every moment of delay is not wasted. It is essential for us to trust that God is aligning things behind the scenes, working things out in ways we cannot yet see or understand. Waiting is not a passive activity, it is an active exercise in faith. The world often views waiting as a frustrating and unproductive experience, but God uses waiting to refine and shape us. It is in the waiting that our character is developed and our faith is tested. Waiting requires patience, and patience is a fruit of the Spirit that grows stronger as we learn to trust God more deeply. Waiting is not just about waiting for something external to change, it is about allowing God to change us on the inside. It is during these times that we learn to surrender our will to God's perfect plan and timing. The longer we wait, the more we are stretched and the more we grow in trust. During the waiting seasons, God is not silent, He is not distant. In fact, He is actively working in our lives, preparing us for what is to come. Our human instinct is often to move quickly when we feel things aren't happening as fast as we think they should. We try to force things to work according to our own plans, but this can lead to mistakes and unnecessary struggles. If we are not careful, impatience can lead us down paths that are not aligned with God's will. We may rush ahead and miss opportunities that were meant for us, or we may end up making decisions that are outside the scope of His perfect will. There is a danger in rushing ahead of God's timing. When we act out of impatience, we may find ourselves in situations that were never part of God's plan for us. We may find ourselves entangled in relationships, jobs, or decisions that were made without fully waiting on God's guidance. These moments of frustration can often be traced back to a failure to trust God's perfect timing. Patience is not just about waiting, but waiting with faith and confidence that God is working, even when we cannot see it. His delay is not denial, and His timing is never wrong. It's important to understand that God uses the waiting seasons to prepare us for something greater than we could ever imagine. He does not just make us wait for the sake of making us wait. He is preparing us for what He has planned. When we look back at our lives, we often see that the moments of waiting were the most valuable times of growth and development. God works in the waiting to build our faith, to strengthen our resolve, and to help us grow in patience. It is in the waiting that we learn to lean on God more fully, to trust Him with our fears and doubts, and to submit our will to His. God knows exactly when to move in our lives. Sometimes the waiting period is the very thing that equips us to handle the blessings He is about to pour out. We may not understand why things aren't happening in our preferred time frame, But we must trust that God's ways are higher than ours. His wisdom exceeds our understanding, and He is never in a rush to give us something that we are not yet ready to handle. Faith means trusting even when we cannot see the full picture. We may be in the midst of a season where things seem stagnant, but we must trust that God is working behind the scenes. He is moving in ways we cannot yet see or comprehend. Even when we cannot feel Him, we must know that He is faithful and that He is preparing us for something incredible. Faith is trusting that even in the silence, God is still working. He is never idle. He is always at work for our good. Sometimes we may become discouraged during the waiting periods, feeling as though nothing is happening. But we must remember that God's timing is not just about when things happen, but also how and why they happen. There are moments in life when we will look back and see how perfectly God's timing lined up with our needs, our desires, and His purpose for us. And when that time comes, we will realize that every second of waiting was worth it. Trusting God's timing is not always easy, but it is always worth it. We must remember that the waiting period is part of God's perfect plan. Every delay, every moment of uncertainty, and every moment of waiting is being used to prepare us for the future He has already designed for us. Trust Him. Wait on Him. His timing will never fail. And when the time is right, He will make a way where there seems to be no way. Waiting is not a passive process. It is an active exercise in faith. Too often, when we find ourselves in times of waiting, we assume that waiting means doing nothing. But in reality, waiting is far from passive. It's an active choice to trust in God's promises, an ongoing act of obedience, and an unwavering declaration that we believe He will fulfill His word in due season. When God asks us to wait, He is not asking us to sit idly by and simply pass the time. No, waiting in God's kingdom requires us to engage with Him in faith, to continue moving forward even when we can't see the full picture. Waiting is a time to reflect on His faithfulness in the past, to meditate on His promises, and to keep our hearts anchored in the truth that God will bring about His perfect will in His perfect timing. One of the greatest misconceptions about waiting is that it's a sign of inaction or lack of purpose. The truth is, God uses waiting to strengthen us, to build resilience, and to deepen our trust in Him. Waiting requires persistence. It is a test of our ability to remain steadfast and committed to God's plan, even when the path seems unclear or when the end appears distant. It requires patience that goes beyond simply waiting for time to pass. It is the patience that is rooted in the confidence that God's promises are true and that He will fulfill them in His own time. Patience, in this sense, is not about simply enduring the wait. It is about remaining hopeful, refusing to be discouraged by the length of time or the obstacles that may arise along the way. It is about trusting in God's ability to deliver what He has promised, even when we cannot see it with our natural eyes. Faith in God's timing means that we trust Him to work in ways that exceed our expectations and comprehension. The waiting period is a season to reaffirm our belief that God will do what He said He would do. In a world that demands immediate results and rewards, it can be difficult to understand why God might delay answering our prayers. But God's timing is always tied to His perfect plan, and in every season of waiting, He is developing something inside of us that will help us when the promise is finally fulfilled. In times of waiting, our faith grows stronger because we are forced to rely on God, not on our own understanding, not on our own timing, but on His perfect wisdom. God never makes us wait without a purpose. Waiting strengthens our spiritual endurance. It sharpens our focus and deepens our faith. It teaches us to trust God in ways that can only come through experiencing His faithfulness in the midst of uncertainty. Waiting isn't about the absence of action. It's about learning to move in faith, even when we don't yet see the results we long for. It's about standing firm in what we believe, holding on to the promises God has made, and trusting that He will deliver when the time is right. Persistence in waiting requires us to continue praying, seeking, and believing, even when the promise seems far off. It means we don't give up just because the answer isn't immediate. God is never late. His promises are always kept. And while we wait, we remain diligent in our pursuit of Him, knowing that He is at work in ways we cannot always see. The Bible teaches us that faith is not merely believing in God's ability to fulfill His promises, but trusting that He will do so in His perfect time. The waiting process allows us to demonstrate that kind of faith. We are not just waiting for God to act, we are actively engaging with His presence and promises, trusting that He will fulfill what He has spoken. Our faith becomes stronger and more resilient as we learn to wait patiently and persistently for the fulfillment of His word. In the waiting, we must avoid the temptation to grow weary or to turn away from God. Instead, we are called to press in, to hold fast to our faith, and to continue trusting that God will fulfill His promises in His own time and way. The process of waiting is itself a testimony of faith, a declaration that we believe God is still working even when we cannot see the full picture. Every moment of waiting, every step of the journey is an opportunity to trust God more deeply. We can't always understand why things take the time they do, but we can trust that He has a plan far greater than anything we could imagine. And as we wait, we are not alone. God walks with us in the waiting. He is refining us, preparing us, and strengthening our hearts to receive what He has promised. So as we wait, we choose to wait in faith. We choose to wait with patience, persistence, and unwavering belief that God will fulfill His word. Waiting is not about doing nothing, it is about trusting God in everything, knowing that He is faithful and His promises are true. Divine preparation is one of the most profound aspects of the waiting period. When we find ourselves in seasons of waiting, we may feel as though time is standing still or that we are stuck in a holding pattern. However, from God's perspective, every moment of waiting is not wasted. It is a crucial part of the preparation He is working in our lives. God uses the waiting period to equip us for what is ahead, to prepare us for the future that He has already planned for us. The waiting process is not only about the eventual fulfillment of promises, but about the transformation and development that takes place within us as we wait. When we are waiting, we are often unaware of the work that God is doing behind the scenes. We focus on the external circumstances and we long for the visible outcome. But God's primary concern is not just the result, it's the person He is shaping us to become in the process. Just as a farmer plants seeds and waits for them to grow, he knows that the growth takes time and requires nurturing. In the same way, God is cultivating us during our waiting seasons, planting seeds of character, wisdom, and resilience that will bear fruit in due time. The truth is, waiting is never a wasted time when we allow God to prepare us. It is in the waiting that we often experience the most significant growth. During these seasons, God works in us to develop qualities that we may not have known we needed, but that are essential for the future He has prepared for us. Waiting teaches us patience, humility, and trust in His timing. It refines our character and helps us develop a deeper reliance on Him. Growth during the waiting season can come in many forms. For some, it may be a deeper understanding of God's word. We may find that we spend more time in prayer, studying Scripture, and seeking His direction. Our faith becomes stronger and we learn to trust in God's ability to provide even when we cannot see the full picture. God uses this time to strengthen our spiritual muscles, preparing us to walk in the destiny He has designed for us. For others, waiting may be a time of emotional or relational growth. We may be learning to deal with disappointment, anger, or frustration in ways that honor God. We may be learning how to release control over areas of our lives and surrender our will to God's plan. These lessons can be painful, but they are necessary for our development. They teach us to trust that God knows best, even when our circumstances don't align with our desires. The waiting period can also be a time for developing practical skills or gaining new knowledge. Sometimes, before God can open a door or give us an opportunity, we need to be equipped with the tools necessary to step into that season. Perhaps we need to learn new skills, improve our health, or develop greater wisdom in a particular area. God uses the waiting season to build a foundation that will support the future He has planned for us. If we rush ahead or try to skip the waiting process, we may find ourselves unprepared for the challenges and responsibilities that come with the blessings God has for us. Divine preparation also involves the shaping of our hearts and minds. God uses the waiting period to help us align our desires with His will. Often when we are in a waiting season, we realize that our desires may not be fully aligned with God's plan. The waiting period becomes an opportunity for us to search our hearts, examine our motives, and allow God to transform our thinking. He molds us into people who are ready to handle His blessings without allowing them to become distractions or idols. During this time, we also learn the importance of endurance and perseverance. There will be moments when we feel like giving up, when we wonder if God will ever fulfill His promises. But these moments are opportunities for us to strengthen our endurance. God doesn't want us to quit in the middle of the process. He wants us to remain steadfast, knowing that every season of waiting has purpose and that He is using this time to prepare us for something greater. When we look at the lives of biblical figures, we see how God used waiting to prepare them for the plans He had in store. Joseph, for example, spent years in prison before he was elevated to a position of power. His waiting period was not wasted. It was during that time that God worked in Joseph's character, helping him develop the wisdom, patience, and humility needed for the leadership role he would one day occupy. Had Joseph not gone through the waiting process, he would not have been prepared to handle the responsibilities that came with his destiny. Similarly, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Those years were not a waste. They were a time of divine preparation. Moses learned the lessons he would need to lead a nation. And he was refined in the desert in ways he couldn't have been while living in Pharaoh's palace. The wilderness was a place of preparation, not punishment. It was where God developed his faith and his character, preparing him for the great task ahead. The waiting period is also a time when God aligns things in the natural world to prepare for the manifestation of His promises. While we may not always understand what God is doing behind the scenes, we must trust that He is orchestrating events, aligning people, and setting up circumstances in ways that will work together for our good. We are not just waiting for things to happen, we are in a season where God is actively preparing everything around us to align with His will. Trusting that every season of waiting is an opportunity for growth, learning, and development requires a shift in our mindset. Instead of seeing waiting as a time of frustration or delay, we must learn to see it as a season of divine preparation. God is working in us, on us, and through us, preparing us for the future He has already planned. If we allow God to work in us during the waiting season, we will emerge from it stronger, wiser, and more ready to step into the next season of our lives. So let us trust the process and believe that every moment of waiting is a moment that God is using to shape us into the person He has called us to be. Impatience is one of the greatest challenges we face during seasons of waiting. When things aren't happening as quickly as we hope, or when we find ourselves frustrated by the delays in life, it's easy to give in to the temptation of rushing ahead. Yet, impatience can be incredibly dangerous. It can lead to mistakes, missed opportunities, and unnecessary struggles. The Bible warns us that when we act impulsively, without waiting on God's timing, we often find ourselves in situations that are far from the best path God has for us. Impatience arises when we grow tired of waiting and begin to doubt whether God's promises will ever come to pass. We may begin to feel that time is running out or that we have been forgotten, leading us to take matters into our own hands. In these moments, the pressure to do something can push us to make decisions that aren't fully aligned with God's plan. We may rush into relationships, jobs, or situations simply to fill the void of uncertainty, believing that doing something is better than waiting on God. However, rushing ahead of God's plan can result in unintended consequences. When we act in haste, we risk making decisions based on our own understanding rather than trusting in God's wisdom. In the rush to get ahead, We may overlook important details, miss out on valuable opportunities, or make choices that ultimately cause more harm than good. God's plan for us is always the best plan, but when we act out of impatience, we move away from His perfect will and step into unnecessary struggles. Consider the story of Abraham and Sarah in the Bible. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but after years of waiting, they began to doubt whether God's promise would come true. Instead of waiting on God's timing, Sarah offered her maidservant Hagar to Abraham to bear a child, thinking that this would fulfill God's promise. The result of this decision was not only the birth of Ishmael, but a series of conflicts and struggles that affected their family for generations. Had they waited on God's timing, they would have seen that God's plan was far greater than they could have imagined. This story highlights the danger of impatience and the long-lasting consequences that can come from rushing ahead of God's plan. Impatience can also cause us to lose sight of the bigger picture. We may become so focused on our immediate desires that we fail to see how God's timing is aligning everything for our good. When we rush, we miss the opportunities to grow, to learn, and to be refined in ways that will prepare us for the future. If we had waited on God's perfect timing, we would have avoided unnecessary heartache and would have been better prepared for the blessings that He had in store for us. Furthermore, impatience often leads to a lack of peace. When we are rushing ahead, trying to force things to happen in our own time, we find ourselves in a constant state of frustration. We feel unsettled, anxious, and uncertain, as if we are pushing against the flow of God's will. But when we trust in God's timing, we experience a deep sense of peace, knowing that He is in control and that He is working everything together for our good. Trusting in God's timing brings relief, because we know that we do not have to strive to make things happen. God will open doors when the time is right, and He will lead us in the right direction when we are ready. Impatience often causes us to overlook the preparation that God is doing behind the scenes. Just because we cannot see the results immediately does not mean that God is inactive. On the contrary, He is always at work, preparing us, aligning circumstances, and opening doors at the right time. When we rush ahead, we miss the lessons, the growth, and the opportunities that God is orchestrating for us. We also risk stepping into situations before we are fully equipped to handle them. God's timing is perfect, because it ensures that we are ready for the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. When we trust God's timing, we avoid the danger of impatience. Trusting God's timing means we refuse to be controlled by our own impatience or the pressure of the world around us. We trust that God's plan is far greater than anything we could do on our own. Even when the wait is long, we trust that God is using that time to prepare us, to strengthen us, and to guide us toward what He has promised. Instead of rushing ahead and creating unnecessary struggles, we choose to rest in the assurance that God is always working on our behalf, and that His perfect plan will unfold in His perfect time. The frustration we experience when we try to rush ahead is a sign that we are not fully trusting in God's timing. Impatience can cloud our judgment, cause us to make impulsive decisions, and lead us into situations that are not part of God's plan for us. However, when we trust God's timing, we avoid those frustrations. We find peace in knowing that He has a purpose for the wait and that He will bring His plan to fruition at the right time. God's timing is always worth the wait. When we resist the temptation to act out of impatience and choose to wait on Him, we position ourselves to receive His best. Trusting in His timing keeps us from rushing into things prematurely and protects us from unnecessary heartache. When we allow God to lead us according to His timing, we can rest assured that the blessings He has in store for us will be worth the wait. Every delay, every moment of uncertainty, and every season of waiting is working for our good. God is not late, He is always right on time. By trusting His timing, we avoid the dangers of impatience and step into the fullness of what He has prepared for us. Every moment of waiting has a divine purpose, even when we cannot see it. While waiting can often feel like a time of stagnation, God is always at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events, aligning opportunities, people, and circumstances in ways that we may not immediately understand. It is in these moments of waiting that God is setting the stage for His perfect will to unfold in our lives. Each season of waiting is a purposeful, intentional part of God's plan, even though it may feel like we are stuck or that time is passing us by. The concept of purpose in the waiting is a reminder that nothing is wasted in God's kingdom. We may feel like we are standing still, but God is always moving. He is arranging people, events, and circumstances in ways that will align perfectly when the time is right. Waiting is not a passive state, it is a time of preparation, development, and trust. During these moments, God is fine-tuning things in both our lives and the lives of those around us, ensuring that everything works together for our good. Just as a conductor of an orchestra arranges each musician's part in harmony with the others, God is orchestrating every aspect of our lives to work together in His timing. We might be focused on the moment of waiting, but God is focused on the larger picture, on the perfect alignment of everything needed for His plan to come to fruition. Opportunities we haven't yet seen are being lined up. People we have yet to meet are being positioned, and circumstances that seem unrelated are being woven together in a beautiful tapestry that only God can create. He is preparing the way for us, even if it doesn't look like it at first. In the process of waiting, God is working on our hearts and on the world around us. He is shaping us to be ready for the blessings He is preparing, and He is working to align everything else in His perfect plan. Sometimes this means that He needs to adjust our mindset, strengthen our faith, or grow our patience before we are ready to step into the next season of our lives. It is in the waiting that we become more attuned to His voice, more confident in His promises, and more patient in trusting His timing. Waiting also creates space for God to work in our relationships and in our circumstances. When we are waiting on God, we often encounter delays or situations that we do not understand. But even in these delays, God is working. He may be positioning people in our lives to assist us, guide us, or challenge us. He may be creating opportunities that we are not yet aware of. Or He may be allowing us to encounter obstacles that will build our strength and character. We may not be able to see the connections in the moment, but when we look back, we will see how each piece was carefully placed in God's timing, working together for our good. There is a beautiful example of this in the life of Joseph. God gave him a dream that he would one day rise to a position of authority, but the journey to that place was long and difficult. Joseph faced betrayal, imprisonment, and hardship along the way. Yet throughout his waiting, God was orchestrating every event. He was positioning Joseph to meet the right people at the right time, and He was aligning circumstances that would eventually bring Joseph to a place of great influence. What appeared to be setbacks were, in reality, part of God's perfect plan for Joseph's life. In the end, Joseph could see that God had been at work the entire time, aligning everything for His good purposes. Similarly, in our own lives, every season of waiting is preparing us for what lies ahead. It might be difficult to understand why certain doors are closed or why we seem to be in a holding pattern. But we must trust that God is using these moments to prepare us for the opportunities He is aligning in the future. The time we spend waiting is not wasted, it is part of the process of God's divine orchestration. He is positioning us and others in a way that will bring His plan to fulfillment in the most powerful way. Waiting is also a time for us to align our own hearts and desires with God's will. In the waiting, God often refines our purpose, clarifies our direction, and helps us discern what is truly important. It is a time to evaluate our priorities and prepare ourselves spiritually and emotionally for what is to come. When we rush through the waiting period, we may miss the opportunity to align our hearts with God's will and to grow in the ways He intends for us. The waiting period is not a period of inactivity, it is a time when God is moving in ways that we cannot yet see. It is a season of alignment, preparation, and transformation. As we wait, we must trust that every delay, every pause, and every moment of uncertainty is part of God's larger plan. Just as a masterful artist works slowly and intentionally, layering each stroke with care. God is using the waiting period to lay His blessings in our lives, preparing us for the masterpiece He is creating. Trusting that there is purpose in the waiting brings us peace. It allows us to surrender our timelines and desires to God's greater plan. When we trust that He is working behind the scenes, we can rest in the assurance that He has not forgotten us. Every season of waiting is a step closer to the fulfillment of His perfect plan, and in that waiting, God is preparing us, shaping us, and aligning everything we need for the journey ahead. So let us embrace the waiting, knowing that it is not wasted time. God is using it to prepare us, to position us, and to align everything for His perfect will. Each moment of waiting has a purpose, and in that purpose we find peace, growth, and the assurance that God's plan will unfold at just the right time. Trust beyond understanding is one of the deepest expressions of faith. It involves believing in God's goodness and sovereignty, even when we cannot comprehend the reasons for the delay or the challenges we are facing. Faith, at its core, is not about having all the answers or seeing the full picture. Instead, it is about trusting in God's character and His ability to lead us, even when the path ahead is unclear. Often we find ourselves in situations where we don't have the full understanding of why things are unfolding the way they are. We may wonder why we are in a season of waiting, why things aren't happening as quickly as we hoped, or why we are facing so many obstacles. During these times, it is easy to become frustrated or disheartened, especially when we can't see the end result. We want to know why God is allowing the wait, and we want to know when the answer will come. However, true faith requires us to trust beyond understanding. In the midst of our waiting, God calls us to trust that He is doing something that we cannot yet see. His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah 55:8-9 that, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." God's perspective is far broader than ours, and He sees the entire scope of our lives from beginning to end. While we may only see a small part of the picture, God sees it all, and He knows exactly what He is doing. Trusting beyond understanding requires us to let go of the need for immediate answers and to surrender to God's perfect timing. We may not understand why we are waiting or why the situation seems so difficult, but we trust that God has a plan and that His plan is always good. Our faith is tested and strengthened in these moments when we choose to trust, even when we cannot comprehend. It is in these moments that we experience the true depth of our relationship with God, when we choose to trust Him with our questions, our confusion, and our doubts. There is a powerful example of this kind of trust in the story of Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but for many years, Abraham and his wife Sarah remained childless. The wait was long, and there were many moments when Abraham likely didn't understand why God was delaying the fulfillment of the promise. Yet Abraham trusted God beyond his understanding. Even when Sarah's age made it seem impossible for her to conceive, and even when the fulfillment of the promise seemed distant, Abraham chose to trust in God's word. His faith was counted to him as righteousness, and in God's perfect timing, Abraham's faith was rewarded with the birth of Isaac, the promised son. Abraham's story teaches us that faith does not depend on understanding every detail or seeing every step ahead. It is about trusting God's heart and knowing that His timing is perfect. Even when we don't understand the process, we can trust that God knows what He is doing. His ways may not make sense to us in the moment, but they are always designed to bring us to a place of fulfillment and blessing. Trusting beyond understanding also means surrendering our need for control. It's easy to want to rush the process, to take matters into our own hands, or to try to force things to happen. However, in doing so, we risk missing out on what God is preparing for us. When we trust beyond understanding, we acknowledge that God is in control, and we submit to His will, even when we can't see the way forward. It is important to remember that trusting beyond understanding doesn't mean that we won't feel frustrated or confused. It's natural to question why things aren't happening according to our timeline. However, faith allows us to hold on to the truth that God is always working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8:28 that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Even when we can't see how it all fits together, we trust that God is working everything for our good. Moreover, trusting beyond understanding means learning to lean into God's peace. When we don't have all the answers and when we don't know why we are waiting, God offers us his peace that transcends understanding. Philippians 4:7 says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This peace is not based on our circumstances or our ability to figure everything out. It is a peace that comes from knowing that God is in control and that he is working things out for our benefit. The act of trusting beyond understanding deepens our relationship with God. It teaches us to rely on him in ways that we may never have if we had the answers, or if everything were happening according to our plan. It strengthens our faith and encourages us to hold on to God's promises, even when the path seems unclear. When we trust God beyond our understanding, we are able to walk by faith and not by sight, knowing that he is leading us to the future he has prepared for us. At times, the waiting may seem endless, and we may feel the pressure to have answers or to make things happen quickly. But trusting beyond understanding means resting in the fact that God is faithful. He knows what he is doing, even when we cannot see it. As we trust God in the waiting, we experience his peace, his faithfulness, and his timing in ways that build a deeper, stronger faith in him. In conclusion, faith is not about understanding every detail of God's plan. It is about trusting him even when we cannot see the full picture. Trusting beyond understanding means surrendering to his timing, relying on his goodness, and having confidence that he knows exactly what he is doing. As we trust God, even when the answers are unclear, we are assured that he is working all things together for our good and his glory. In conclusion, my friends, the journey of waiting is not a journey of idleness or frustration. It is a divine process, one that has purpose, preparation, and promise written all over it. Trusting in God's timing is not merely a passive act of sitting still. It is an active demonstration of faith, belief, and obedience. While we may not always understand the reasons behind the delays, the detours, or the pauses in our lives, we must stand firm in the assurance that our God is orchestrating everything with divine precision. Every moment of waiting serves a purpose in God's grand plan. He is aligning people, opportunities, and circumstances behind the scenes to ensure that his will is fulfilled in the best way possible. Trusting beyond our understanding means surrendering our need for control and acknowledging that his wisdom far exceeds our own. We may not always see the full picture, but faith is trusting that the master designer is painting a masterpiece and each stroke is being applied in perfect time. So, in the waiting, we must not rush, we must not fret, we must not give in to impatience, for it is in this divine waiting room that we are being prepared for the greatness that lies ahead. Each season of waiting is a season of growth, refinement, and alignment. God is not delaying us, he is developing us. And when the time is right, he will make a way where there seems to be no way. Let us walk in this truth. God's timing is always perfect, and his plan for us is far greater than we could ever imagine. Therefore, let us trust him completely, wait with patience, and walk by faith, knowing that in due season, he will bring all things together for our good and his glory.